No question on the BuZZ website has generated more interest than whether we can safely use SSD drives on a Mac. Tonight on the BuZZ, Larry O'Connor, the CEO of OWC, shares his answer to that question. Next, the worst feeling in the world is discovering that your hard disk has failed. However, all is not lost. You can actually recover your data if you know where to go. Chris Bross with DriveSavers joins us to explain how to get your data back after a hard disk crash. Finally, Art Adams is a director of photography with 28 years experience creating films, episodic television, and commercials. This week, he shares how he approaches lighting a scene, along with showing specific examples of his work. All this plus Tech Talk and Randi Altman's perspective on the news. The BuZZ starts now.
Tonight's digital production buzz is brought to you by Otherworld Computing at MacSales.com and by ZenData at ZenData.com.
Since the dawn of digital filmmaking,
authoritative.
one show serves a worldwide network of media professionals,
Current.
uniting industry experts,
Production.
filmmakers,
Post-production.
and content creators around the planet.
Distribution.
From the media capital of the world in Los Angeles, California, the Digital Production Buzz goes live now.
And welcome to the Digital Production Buzz, the world's longest-running podcast for creative content producers covering media production, post-production, marketing, and distribution around the world. That handsome gentleman on the other side of the table.
I'm sorry. I'm talking to Grant on the
live chat.
Yeah, we're talking about coffee. We're talking about friggin' coffee.
Mike, this is a
All right,
media
I'm sorry.
program.
I'm
Focus.
I'm focusing.
You know, next week I'm chairing a panel which is sponsored by Keycode Media and Sony, looking at 4K media in post-production.
Can I come to that, by the way?
Absolutely,
Or
it's
do
free.
I have to watch it?
You can watch it. It's a live web stream. It'll be posted on
How
YouTube
do I
later.
watch it?
Go to the keycodemedia.com website and sign up.
And you're the moderator.
I'm the
And
moderator.
You've got a lot
of
of really good people there. It's Michael Cioni.
Yep, we got Michael Cioni, who is head of Light Iron, Brian McMahon, senior digital colorist at Modern Video Film.
Wow, I know him.
Robert Carroll, senior director of Dolby Labs, standing in front of an old reel-to-reel tape machine, which gives you an idea of just exactly what's going on. And then
Really, what do you
myself.
ask these guys?
The Keycodes put this together. We want to talk about, and Sony want to talk about how we're going to, what are we talking about? We're going to talk about how we use 4K in post. Yeah, are you doing any work in 4K, Mike?
All right, we talked about this a little bit before the show started. Is anybody working in 4K? And of course, the answer is yes. Everybody's working in 4K. Are they distributing in 4K? No. But are they acquiring in 4K? Yes, because everything is shooting in 4K. Maybe not these cameras, and maybe we're not distributing in 4K, but Larry, come on, you will. In what? A year, 18 months?
The key is if you're going to start to edit in 4K, as opposed to acquire in down res, because if you're going to drop it into a 720 timeline.
But storage is so cheap, and everybody is editing in 4K. You know,
what was it
except for you.
What were you announcing about Samsung and their new SSD
isn't
drive?
that something? It was. I saw it today. It is a 15 terabyte SSD drive that fits into these laptops.
Wow.
15 terabyte. They didn't announce the price, which is probably around $5,000 or something like that.
Indeed. Well, we got all kinds of stuff. We're going to be talking about storage with Larry O'Connor from OWC. We also want to talk with Randi Altman, talking about perspectives on the news. Mike and I will be back with Larry right after this. This is Randi Altman's Perspective. Randi Altman has been writing about our industry for more than 20 years. Now she's got her own website, postperspective.com, where she covers our industry. Hello, Randi. Welcome back.
Hello from LAX, Larry.
That's
How
right.
are you?
You spent the week at SIGGRAPH, didn't you? And now you're heading home. But what have you discovered that we need to know about at the trade show?
Well, it's sort of the theme that I've been talking about on your show for weeks. And I know you might not want to hear more about it, but SIGGRAPH, everywhere you looked were headsets, virtual reality, people being immersed into different environments. Yes, it's a buzzword, but it was there, and it's being used in multiple ways. There was a wonderful luncheon put on by John Petty Research, and he had a panel made up of a fellow who, James Knight, who worked on Avatar with James Cameron, who talked about how virtual production is sort of like a precursor to virtual reality. And then we had somebody from Jaunt Studios in Hollywood, who I've discussed before, who wants to be the Netflix of virtual reality and creative virtual reality content, not just standing on the mountain and looking over. And then we had the CTO of Tippett Studios, and they were all discussing essentially these immersive environments and the different ways that they could be used. And the Tippett fellow talked about how they're creating apps where some of the characters that they've helped create could be composited into people's own personal family photos, and for fun, just for fun. But it's just another example of these immersive environments and how they're being used. Another one that's very quickly that was kind of fun is the Ford Motor Company was there with a demo that was being powered by SIGGRAPH Devil Box, and that is how they design their cars. They will have labs all over the country. They'll all sort of meet in this virtual environment and sort of walk through the car. And, is the headlight in place we want it to be? And that's how they go about making sure that they're creating the best cars possible, the cars they want to create, and they're doing it in a virtual way. So there are a lot of different ways that people are using it. The question that I know you're going to ask me is, will it be media and entertainment? And I think it will. But as the fellow from Jaunt mentioned, we need the post tools to catch up. So he's talking about the editing tools, the color tools, visual effects tools. So that's the next step.
Were you finding the greatest amount of interest in virtual reality being the creation of content, the development of tools to create virtual reality content, or hardware for consumers to play back content?
Not necessarily the consumers yet. And I know where you're going with this. It's more about the toolkits for people to create the content. So NVIDIA announced a toolkit for VR and many other companies as well. So right now, everybody's, and then of course there are the headsets and making sure that they're set agnostic, which is important. So you have all these people out there creating these virtual and these immersive environments, and they want to make sure that everybody works together. So it's sort of a new frontier, but it's rolling along.
Are you seeing the tools to create VR content stable enough for content creators that are not deeply pocketed large studios to start to play in this game, or is it something we need to wait for a few more weeks on?
I think we need to wait. Right now it is the bigger studios that are diving in. I don't know if I see a guy in his kitchen yet being able to create these kind of environments, but as the cameras are being introduced, John has one, and Nokia just introduced one as well. So the tools are making their way out, and I'll be eager to see how the creatives use these tools and then how the consumers eat up the technology.
Randi Altman runs her own website at postperspective.com. Randi, you travel safely on your way home, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Take care, Larry.
To read more from Randi Altman, visit postperspective.com. Still to come on The Buzz, Larry O'Connor, Chris Bross, Art Adams, Tech Talk, and Buzz Flashback. When you're working with media, one thing is essential. Your computer needs peak performance. However, when it comes to upgrading your Mac, there are so many different options to choose from that the process can be confusing. That's why Otherworld Computing carries the best upgrades that lets your computer performance and storage grow as your needs grow. Since 1988, OWC has become one of the most trusted names in quality hardware and comprehensive support to the worldwide computer industry. With an extensive online catalog of Mac, iPhone, and iPad enhancement products, as well as a dedicated team of knowledgeable experts providing first-rate tech support, OWC has everything you need to take your current system to the next level. Whether you need to maximize your system's memory, add blazing speed, or enhance reliability, look no further than the friendly experts at OWC. Learn more by visiting macsales.com today. That's macsales.com.
Larry O'Connor founded Otherworld Computing, which is also called OWC, in 1988. Their website, which you may know better, is macsales.com. OWC is both a reseller and a developer, supporting all things Mac for more than 25 years. And as you just noticed, they are also a sponsor of the Buzz. Hello, Larry. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Larry, for having me back. Glad to be here.
We are delighted to have you here because last October, you were on the Buzz for an interview that became the most popular interview on the Buzz for the last 12 months. You told us at that time about the fact that many solid-state drives, which we call SSDs, weren't working with Mac OS X, which is Yosemite, due to a lack of trim support. Apple SSDs would work, but many third-party drives would fail. Could you take us back to that time and summarize what the original issue is, because we want to talk about how it's changed since then?
Certainly, and definitely want to clarify, prior to 1010, there was the opportunity to use a hack to turn on trim, which in itself was relatively risky, but you could turn on a lot of third-party, actually pretty much almost every third-party drive out there has a requirement for trim. Without trim, you can run into a wide variety of different issues, and this hack was out to turn on the trim and at least enable the Apple trim, which by no means is an ideal solution, but it was there. And then 1010 came along. Apple didn't want people modifying a driver and then hacking a driver, so they blocked that path, with, at least in a way that, to perform the hack, it would give you a warning and block, actually, depending on how you did it, lock the system up. But it took away this easy path to enable trim.
Explain to us what
good for drives.
Explain to us what trim does.
Trim effectively enables the drive and the system to stay to some degree in sync and keep free space in its most optimum state. It helps with garbage collection and effectively makes sure that the drive and the OS are talking right, so that when it's time to write and generate new data can be written efficiently and with the least amount of write amplification back to the drive.
Now, again, if I remember what you told us back in October, was that OWC SSD drives were not affected by this. Why were other drives affected and you guys weren't?
When we got into the SSD space, in fact, we actually delayed, probably about a year and a half. There was no trim support whatsoever, not even trim support for Apple's own drives. Apple hadn't released it yet, and thus there wasn't a way to hack it on and utilize that, how to say, what was designed for the Apple SSD. As a result, we focused on a solution that had no dependency, no requirement to use trim. Our drives simply don't need trim, and quite frankly, we see trim as a crutch that's an imperfect solution as opposed to a better way to do it with internal drive management. So our drives don't need trim, and that's a huge benefit for using them on the Mac or any system, and I can get into that later.
Well, the big benefit to using an SSD is that it's faster. I mean, it's significantly, blindingly faster than a standard spinning hard drive. For now, again, I got to look at my notes. On June 30th of this year, Apple released the update to 1010 called 1010.4, which enabled a product called Trim Force to run, which turned trim on for third-party hard drives. What does this do? Because it's been a mixed blessing for people that are thinking of using it.
Trim Force is now an Apple, and instead of making people run a hack, which really didn't tell people what they were necessarily stepping into, Trim Force is a command line function where you can effectively enable Apple's trim on a non-Apple drive. And when you enable trim via this method, they give you a pretty good warning and disclaimer letting you know this is, put it very lightly, it's not an ideal solution. And it should also be known that Trim Force doesn't support RAID volumes, it doesn't support USB or FireWire or other externally connected devices. It's there to work with static connected SSDs, so it still doesn't give you trim where trim may be needed for a lot of drives via these other connectivity options.
And again, does the update with the 1010.4 affect OWC gear?
No, you can enable trim. Our drives do support trim, and part of that's because there's so many people that are convinced that you have to have trim, but we've been really working hard with the reviewers, and the proof is in the pudding, and the proof is out there that effectively demonstrate our drives perform exceptionally well. In fact, they don't benefit from having trim, and they can, in certain circumstances, perform better without trim being there. Trim is really a crutch, and if you don't need that crutch, you're better off. So in terms of affecting us, it really doesn't affect us one way or the other, because for now over 5 years, we've been shipping drives that absolutely do not have a dependency on trim, do not require trim, to give you both, best reliability and best performance. And on the reliability side, we're talking about maximizing the media by not spending a whole lot of extra write cycles, to get that data stored. Without trim, or even drives that, have trim enabled, you tend to see higher write amplification, which reduces the life of the media. And other drives out there, even with trim engaged, as they get closer to full, especially as they get past the 75% mark, they can really slow down a lot. Our drives, all the way up to 99.9% capacity, pretty much fill all the way up for all practical purposes until there's not any space left. You're at full speed for write. Wow. There is no slowdown. And again, that's because they don't depend on this external command interface. They have internal drive management that, simply put, rocks. And it was the only way to do it when we got into this.
One of the comments Grant is making on our live chat is that SSDs are great for fast performance, but he's been reading, especially on the enterprise storage forum, that SSD drives are not as reliable as spinning media. Have you found that SSDs have a reliability issue?
I would comment on that. It would depend upon how they're implemented. A drive that is built, especially on the Mac side of the equation, we use SSDs in enterprise, and SSDs are definitely invading enterprise. So to say it's less reliable than a hard drive, I don't think I have to disagree with. And I really can't come back with a statement on that, other than if you're using a drive that's optimal for your environment, there's no reason for that to be the case. If you're using a drive that needs trim to operate correctly, and it's in a RAID where there is no trim support, that drive, number one, can slow down pretty quick, as data is pumped into it, and whereas write amp may be managed at a low level, when it has that trim crutch going, it's without trim, write amplification goes really high, and that reduces write cycle. I should say that consumes write cycles and takes away from the reliability of that. Certainly takes away from the reliability in terms of longevity of that drive. Other drives out there, there's issues. As they push density, this 3D, certainly the first generations of the 3D NAND were pushing the envelope, and now they're putting firmware updates out there, not for our drives. We're sticking with the MLC at this point. 3D NAND is, around the corner for us. But the first generations of 3D NAND, they found that there was voltage drift, and they didn't have it calculated correctly, and that's a whole other area of issue. So it's bleeding edge stuff, but again, if you have a proven product that's designed for the application, designed for what you're using it in, and how to say, and around, and understand its requirements, there's no reason for an SSD today, the right SSD, to be less reliable than a drive.
It's easy to get overwhelmed with all the technology, and it's easy to get lost in all the specs. Based upon the fact that you guys are shipping both SSD drives and spinning media in both single drive and RAID configurations, should consumers generally avoid SSD, or are they safe with the technology?
Oh, they're absolutely safe with the technology. Again, as long as you're buying the right drive for the application. And for us, we provide products that plug, play, and go. You shouldn't have to worry about trim force and hacks that. Even trim force is a hack, and Apple acknowledges that, and they effectively tell the user that you're turning something on to enable, this trim to be active, with the drive that's not an Apple drive, and this is not supported. And be aware, lots of us, technically, bad things can happen. So in terms of avoiding SSDs, absolutely not. They are. They make the system today. We have not been IO bound. We have not been processor bound in a lot of respects for 6-7 years. And SSD releases the IO bottleneck, and that's why customers today are loading up systems from 2006, 2007, 2008. You drop an SSD in, and they have a brand new life. It's unbelievable the difference an SSD makes. So to say avoid, I absolutely cannot say avoid SSD. Just select the right SSD. You should not have to use hacks to use the drive in your system. You shouldn't have to be thinking about those things.
The other thing that I want to talk about is that the reason we use SSDs is because we want to get performance. And the other option for performance is not an SSD, but a RAID. should we use spinning media in RAIDs or should we use SSD in RAIDs? And what kind of performance can we expect from a RAID?
Now, I would argue you should use both. In the case of hard drives, 4 drives can consistently deliver roughly 800-900 megabytes a second with today's spinning media options. An SSD, 4 SSDs will typically peak your bus at this point. I'm looking at Thunderbolt 2 and hit about 1,300 megs a second, which after mini DisplayPort overhead and other overheads, that's about what you have on that bus. So the performance is all about what you're doing. Hard drives are less expensive and give you more capacity, and there's a place for both.
Now, it's interesting because Thunderbolt 2 has a speed, is a theoretical speed of 2.2 gigabytes a second. But you just said that we could really max out about 1.3 gigabytes a second. What costs us that extra gigabyte a second of speed?
Well, I guess you could say it's 1.3 to 1.4 gigabytes a second, 1,300 to 1,400 megs a second. And part of that is reserved for mini DisplayPort. You have a display channel that's consuming some of that has some of that bandwidth reserved. You also have effectively there's two 10 gigabit lanes there that are being, like a better term, merged. So there's overhead in terms of balancing that. And at the end of the day, certainly with a Mac Pro, we have multiple Thunderbolt channels. You can put 2 Thunder bays with soft RAID rolling and actually span across the 2 Thunderbolt ports, and now you're over in real world over 2 gigabytes a second. It's the same throughput.
But that assumes that you're using multiple ports. On a single port, the speed limit's about 1.3, 1.4 gigabytes a second.
On the data side, absolutely. But remember, when you're plugging a display in, there's also high bandwidth supporting that display. But correct. For a data, if you have one display and one drive plugged in, you've got about 1,300, 1,400 megs. So if you don't have a display plug in, that bandwidth is still reserved for mini DisplayPort.
Okay, now the other question that I want to have you explain to us is there's a difference between what's called a hardware RAID and a software RAID. What's the difference between the two?
The biggest difference is, in the case of a hardware RAID, if something happens to your box, any number of different things, power surge, and you're shipping your system across the country from a chute, and you separate the drives from the system for safety or just to pack the drives up. In the case of a hardware RAID, you have a proprietary schema, a proprietary controller inside that you effectively have to have another of the same box to access the data. If something happens to your hardware RAID box, it's even a different firmware change out there on that brand box, you could run into issues recovering. Another thing about hardware boxes, even the ones that, until you get to a really high level enterprise product, there's everything that's out there today. While it has some kind of drive failure notification, it's extremely poor and it's highly questionable, what the accuracy of that reporting is. With a software RAID solution, a software RAID, certainly use a software RAID. And I got to differentiate between Apple's RAID, which is actually gone, by the way, under CopyTown, 1011 drops RAID support in disk utility. But with using soft RAID, number one, you have a situation where as long as you can connect those drives, whether it's through a couple of USB cases, whether it's back in a Mac Pro, direct on SATA, SATA, any way you can get those drives onto the system, you can access the data. It's not a proprietary lock to a piece of hardware. So if something happens to a box you're using to connect those drives, you're able to use pretty much anything under the sun to connect those drives, and the RAID volume will reassemble. We're not, certainly with soft RAID and the solutions that we ship with soft RAID, we want you to select your hardware because we do believe it's the best hardware on the planet for what it offers. That being said, we're not locking you to it. If there's something, if you have a different choice, or there's a case where you're in the field, something happens, you need to get your data. There's not a complicated process or specific proprietary hardware box you've got to have to get access to those drives. And that also makes it easier to recover in the case of a multi-drive, say, or something they drop, something bad happens physically, and you got to send them somewhere off for recovery. Again, there's not something proprietary that increases the complexity of that data recovery.
And Larry, for people that want more information about OWC, where can they go on the web?
For the soft RAID and the RAID solutions, they can absolutely visit OWCdigital.com. We have a lot of great information there. And, of course, they can find our entire product selection at www.macsales.com.
And Larry O'Connor is the CEO of OWC. Larry, thanks for joining us today.
Still to come.
Hey, my
on
pleasure,
Buzz.
Larry. Anytime.
Chris Bross, Art Adams, Tech Talk, and Buzz Flashback.
If you need long-term archiving for your video content, then you should look at ZenData. They specialize in providing secure, long-term storage of video content with a low cost per terabyte. The company has a variety of archive solutions that range from external LTO drives that can connect to your laptop to multi-petabyte storage systems using huge robotic libraries. ZenData systems will store your content on LTO or Sony optical disc archive cartridges. And with their next release, they also provide an option for archiving to the Amazon cloud. They offer great compatibility with many of the third-party applications used in the media and entertainment industry, including most media asset management systems. ZenData has hundreds of installations around the world, from Los Angeles to Mongolia. So if protecting your assets is important to you, visit zendata.com. That's XENDATA.com. Chris Bross is the Chief Technology Officer at DriveSavers. They specialize in data recovery and forensics. Chris guides the development of new tools, technology, and techniques to recover critical user data. Since joining the company in 1995, Chris has found ways to recover data from hard drives, SSD, and RAIDs that have suffered from abuse, neglect, floods, fire, and failure. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Hello, Larry, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you.
Chris, we're glad to have you with us. In this last segment, we talked with Larry O'Connor at OWC about RAIDs and hard drives. How can DriveSavers help us if a hard drive dies?
Well, that's an excellent question, and of course, it's why we exist. We're like the emergency room for hard drives. You never know when you're going to need it, but you're happy we're open 24 hours when it occurs. So, we work on all storage products, and, hard drives in particular, as most of us know who have them, they fail at some point in their life cycle. And unfortunately, they fail sometimes in, mechanical ways or firmware ways or a multitude of different failures. And they do it when your data is not backed up and you really need to present something the very next morning.
Well, what types of devices does DriveSavers support?
Well, we work on what we say consumer through the enterprise. On the consumer side, we are absolutely inundated with smartphones these days, recovery of iOS, Android, Windows, and BlackBerry phones, digital camera media from all sorts of devices, lots of video, of course, then, of course, solid-state drives, hard drives, RAID arrays, storage area networks, kind of everything, soup to nuts.
Well, what kind of problems are you running into with, say, mobile devices?
Well, with mobile devices, you just said it. It's a mobile device. That means the device is in motion, and so is the user. And they're creating unique content all the time, a.k.a. photos, videos, text messages, other things. And those devices have a tendency to break, get smashed, get dropped, end up in oceans, in swimming pools. All kinds of things happen to them, including the operating system going corrupt or the user forgetting their passcode, all of which lead to someone not having access to data that they probably did not have a chance to back up yet.
I think that's the definition of just about all of us, isn't it? We should have made a backup, but we didn't.
Well, that's true, and this is our 30th year in business of telling people to back up their data, and people still, unfortunately, not always doing so, and so we're always busy, 24 hours a day.
I was just wondering, a mobile device, an SSD drive, this is just chips, and if you get it wet, I mean, how do you recover data from some of these solid-state devices?
Well, we just spent the last 3 days at Flash Memory Summit, the premier show on this side of the world for flash devices in Santa Clara, and we were talking about data recovery there from solid-state drives. And, well, it's a magic wand and a very special voodoo doll, and when you place them right next to the SSD, the bits magically fly off onto a backup media.
It's just amazing, the technology that's available. I would say that's very close to magic, if you ask me.
Well, it is, and that magic includes a little bit of secret sauce and a whole lot of R&D, which is where we spend a lot of the cycles with the group I work with, which is trying to figure out all these new technologies, and a lot of it is flash, of course, and how they fail and how we can recover them.
Well, let's switch back up. A lot of the folks that watch the Buzz are media creators, and they're dealing with very, very large files on large storage devices like hard disks and RAIDs. If a hard drive crashes, what should we not do, and what should we do to have the highest likelihood of getting our data back?
That's an excellent question. If we're talking about any type of failure that, well, on a hard drive or a solid-state drive for that matter, even a logical failure, which would be a deletion or an accidental format, that's a data loss, powering down the unit is absolutely the best thing to do. In some cases, and we don't like to recommend this to a user for safety concerns, cutting power to the device rather than properly shutting it down, although not necessarily something you would typically do, can actually help in a data loss situation because the file system doesn't necessarily have a chance to update. And in some cases, you can cut power to the device or pull power to the device if it's not a notebook, and the drive goes down hard, but it's possible that that simple step will save some of the things that we want to recover. Now, if it's a mechanical failure and you actually hear the drive clicking, knocking, making noise of any sort, that is likely a physical failure within the device, and it's mechanical, and it's going to get worse. So you absolutely need to power that thing down ASAP, because the last thing we want is media failure or head crash, which is one of the most catastrophic failures.
Well, should we do things like running a data repair program? I mean, because clearly DriveSavers is wonderful, but it ain't free. And what should we do to, like, a first triage before sending it in to you?
Excellent question. So if it's a case of what, again, we would call a logical data loss, where the device is okay, but the data has been lost, or it's corrupt, or it won't mount, for example, there are free and inexpensive utilities out there, absolutely tons of them, that can do a great job of recovering data. But the gotcha is that you want to be in a read-only state with a read-only utility, because you don't want to make any modifications to the file system that might actually cause additional loss or overwrite the data. So if you're going to run software, run read-only. If you happen to have the opportunity to make an image of your drive prior to doing that, like a clone of your drive with Carbon Copy Cloner or whatever Acronis tool, that's great. But if it's a physical failure and the drive is actually making noise, or there's something mechanically wrong with it, stop, drop, and roll.
What are some of the best practices to protect data, and what do you advise for backups?
Well, there's a pretty simple rule to remember that gives you excellent, what I would say, well, it should be the mandatory minimum type of backup protection, and it's the 3-2-1 plan. 3 copies of your data on at least 2 different external sources as well, and at least one of those being off-site. So you want to keep that primary copy on whatever your source media is, if that's possible. I realize for videographers and filmmakers and things like that, they're ingesting a lot of data. But that 3-2-1 approach will give you a lot of protection. It's not absolute by any means, but it does give you that ability to have multiple copies locally that you physically own and can touch, and ideally one off-site, with the consideration of cloud, if cloud is appropriate for your type of data and the volume that you push.
One of the things that you guys do, I was struck in the introduction that you also do forensics work. What's forensics?
Forensic work, when it regards to data, is simply producing data as evidence. It used to be evidence was fingerprints, hair, blood splatters, things like that. Well, evidence today is your phone, your Twitter feed, your public Facebook account, your LinkedIn page, and everything else that we get on your smartphone. And when law enforcement and the legal community are looking for data from a particular device that was either used in civil cases or in criminal cases, producing that data so that it can be held up as viable evidence in a court of law is what forensics and data is all about.
So it's not just recovering data from a cell phone that was intentionally destroyed, but it's proving that the information that's on the cell phone actually was on the cell phone. It wasn't injected later? Question mark?
Absolutely. To put it in layman's terms, we say that the data has to tell a story. And the extraction of that data comes with chain of custody and secured engineers only touching the device, an audit trail, and a very large report of everything that we've found on the device, including possibly looking for the needle in the haystack or the smoking gun evidence or that one email that was deleted. That will be the part of the evidence they need in the court.
Before we run out of time, I know that DriveSavers recently partnered with Kingston. What does this mean for us?
Yeah, well, Kingston cares a lot about their customers and a lot about their quality, and they have a special program called Kingston Care, which says that they'll do anything to take care of a customer if they need to. And basically, DriveSavers is now offering data recovery service for the rare and kind of unique ways that drives can die. And if a Kingston customer has a situation, we're the best option to help the customer recover the data.
And Chris, for people that need more information or your help, where can they go on the web?
Well, they can find us at drivesavers.com. We have a good web presence and out in the social media as well. You can find us at all kinds of technical trade shows and on the road as well. And we're always available 24 hours a day at 800-440-1904.
And Chris Bross is the Chief Technology Officer for DriveSavers Data Recovery. And Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with your viewers.
That was fun. Thanks.
Still to come on The Buzz, Art Adams, Tech Talk, and The Buzz Flashback. Hi, I've got a ton of brand new training videos showcasing all the new features in Final Cut Pro 10.2, and it's available today. In fact, we've updated our entire Final Cut training just for this release. We added more than 70 new movies covering every major new feature in the software. Then I added new techniques and new ways of working that I've discovered and written about in my newsletter over the years. I updated our workflow and editing training with 31 new movies and effects with 41 new movies. This makes our Final Cut Pro 10 training the most comprehensive, most up-to-date, and most affordable way to learn everything about this amazing software. It's quick, it's easy, and it's complete. I'm proud of all of my training, and especially this one. Get your copy today in our store at larryjordan.com, or even better, become a member of our video training library and get access to all our training for one low monthly price. Both are incredible values. Thanks. This is Tech Talk from the Digital Production Buzz.
The automation part is once you have a setting you like, right mouse click on it or control click on it and save it as a droplet. We can give this a name. We'll just say QT compression, save it to the desktop. And what's happened now is that this droplet now appears on the desktop. This is an automated compression setting. Whenever I want to compress a movie, I grab the movie and drag it on top of the droplet. The movie is now loaded. See where it says Chinese Dragon? It's already defaulting to the source, the destination that we set, and I click Start Batch, and it will then compress the file without me ever having to open compressor or apply a setting. For stuff that I do week after week after week, where I've established what my compression settings are, I don't need to open compressor. I don't need to do this kind of testing. I've already done it. Now I just simply am in production mode, execution mode, drag the movies on, and go to compressor. Now, what I found with compressor is if I drag, say, 50 movies on at a time, only 2 or 3 movies will show up in here. Instead, what I do is I will open the droplet itself by simply double-clicking it. And then inside the droplet, I'll select all the movies that I want to compress,
here for instance, and drag them into the top half of the droplet. And I can compress 30, 50, 100 movies at a time, all automatically, and compressor doesn't have to run. The droplet takes care of handling all the compression automatically. Really, really cool.
This Tech Talk was shared from Larry Jordan's website at larryjordan.com.
Art Adams is a cinematographer with 28 years' experience in the film industry. He spent 10 years in Hollywood working on features and TV series before returning to his native Northern California, where he currently shoots commercials and corporate marketing projects. Between shoots, he works as a consultant for a number of industry companies, including Sony, Sound Devices, and DSC Labs, and writes technical and educational articles at Pro Video Coalition and DV Info. Hello, Art. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a delight having. I had a chance to look at some of your work, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, thank you.
I want to start with something simple. When did you decide to become a director of photography? What was that moment?
I was 12 years old, and I remember watching TV series like The Prisoner, the original series, and a science fiction show called Space 1999. And I remember watching the compositions and the lighting, and mostly the compositions and the blocking and the staging and the camera movement. And the way these shows were shot, they were both British shows. The way they were shot was very different from what I was used to seeing on U.S. shows, which tended to be very formulaic. And what I saw in these shows was much more thoughtful, scenes shot in one take, interesting compositions, shifting focus from foreground to background as a dramatic tool. And it just grabbed me, and I decided I wanted to do that. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I wanted to be the person looking through the camera making those decisions.
People call themselves directors of photography, and some people call themselves cinematographers. You refer to yourself as a director of photography, a DP. Do you see a difference between the two terms, and why did you pick the one you did?
That's an interesting question. I've thought about that. And I decided that I'm a director of photography because I don't believe that I am the only person making the image happen. I usually work with a very talented crew. They all know how to do their jobs better than I know how to do their jobs, which is why I appreciate them. And I like the fact that I can work with a gaffer and not have to walk around and say, put this light there. I can say, this is what I'm going for. This is how I think I want to do it. Do you have a better way of getting the same thing? And often they do, because that's all they do on a regular basis is solve these problems for people like me. So I work that with my key grip. I work that with my camera assistant, my gaffer. And I try to make it into a team situation. Because for me, the reason people get into this business is because they want to create stuff. And if you take that away from people, then they become less focused and less involved. And while I am responsible for the image, I do want to take advantage of their expertise and get them involved in problem solving and say, this is what I'm going for. You know, what's a better way to do it? And they love that. And it's just a great way to keep the crew engaged and involved and excited about what we're doing. I could walk in and just say, you know, and to a certain extent I do. I say, put this there, I want that, put that through that window. But I do, when possible, try to say, you know, show me a better way.
For those of you watching, Art's website is artadamsdp.com, artadamsdp.com. I mention that because we're going to be referring to some of the movies that Art has posted on his website, and there's a lot of really interesting demos. I spent a wonderful hour getting ready for our conversation wandering around your website. I was looking at the La Crema ads, Oriental Training, the HTC Windows Phone, California State Fair, VMware, and more that I didn't even bother to take notes on. And I noticed, one, that you don't have a particular style, but I noticed that most of your sets are highly dressed. They're very, very art-directed, and you tend to work with groups of actors, 2, 3, 4 people, as opposed to just one or huge crowds. I was wondering if that's a fair characterization of the work you're doing now.
That's interesting. I never thought of that. I basically walk into whatever I walk into, and I guess it's either luck or it's the projects that I choose to show. I landed an agent last year. We've had talks about the generalist thing, and it's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's nice to be able to do a lot of different projects. A lot of DPs get hired because they do one thing really, really well. I tend to get hired because people like working with me, and I can usually handle whatever they throw at me. But it's harder to get in the door that way because until they actually know me, they're not necessarily inclined to hire me because I don't have a niche that they need. So it's a little harder to get in the door. It's a lot easier to stay there. But yeah, it's. I wouldn't say that those are necessary. That's probably more about just the projects I choose to show than anything else. I do a lot of single person on green screen. I do a certain amount of talking head stuff, which is I live in Silicon Valley. We do a lot of executive talking heads, and the set dressing. Sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't, and I tend not to show the stuff where it doesn't happen because that set dressing helps lighting so much. It makes my job so much easier.
Why is that?
Well, it's always easier to light something that's there, and the background is actually the hardest thing to deal with because there's always, if you're on a set or if you're on a location, there's 360 degrees of background. And if that's not dressed, then I have to do something to make that look interesting, and that takes a lot of time. And I don't usually get more time to do that. And that's where I have to just be clever and try to figure out something to do very quickly. But the better dressed it is, the less I have to light it because there's already texture there. And there's always a background. I know where the people are going to be, so they're relatively easy to light, but I don't always know what background I'm looking at. So the more stuff there is in the background, the less I have to work. Which is good because schedules are getting really compressed and budgets are going way down. So we have to move a lot faster than we used to.
Do you have a special way of doing green screen to make it look like it's not a green screen shot?
I try. I don't always get to see the background plates. A lot of the time in advertising, which is a fair amount of what I do, these decisions get put off until the last second, or the agency likes to see lots of different options. So I try to get a sense of what the background is going to be. If it's just kind of a general digital background, then I can kind of do what I want. There's one project on my site, VMware. It's a guy on White Limbo.
Spectacularly, it was like a minute and a half slow zoom in from a head to toe shot to a close-up with sync sound at the very end. It was a very striking spot with great contrast between the slow move in and the rapid cutting of accelerated footage in between. I was very impressed with that.
Thanks. That was fun because the director asked me for something different. He didn't say, I just want, shoot this guy in front of White Limbo. He said, I want moody, top-lit dramatic. And you never see that in White Limbo, which is wonderful. So I had my gaffer brought a 6K space light. We didn't use all that power, but it's just a big, skirt. And then I had them take a 12 by grid cloth and wrap it. And we called it the jellyfish light because it was basically this big blob. And we hung it right overhead, and we put black in front of the guy's feet to knock out the fill coming in from below. And we shot it. I think I had a little tweenie on a goalpost overhead, just giving him a little extra eye light. And that was a 25-foot dolly move on a 40 millimeter ultra prime.
Wow.
At T8. And I lit it up that way because I knew at the end my assistant was going to have a really interesting time. After a 90-second move to get to the end and go, oh, because it's really tough. I mean, even at T8, he's got maybe almost an inch of depth of field. So it was pretty difficult, but we got into a rhythm after a while, and it worked out really nicely. But that I'm really pleased with that spot because there's no color correction on that. That's the way we shot it.
It was a 90-second dolly move, and the actor had to stay in character the entire 90 seconds while this behemoth of a camera is just getting closer and closer, and he's not supposed to twitch.
And it landed,
I was
feet away.
Yeah, you were close to running him over. I was very impressed. That was a cool. And then there was the other spot where you had with I can't remember, oh, it was La Crema, where you had 4 women doing 3 different scenes without the camera stopping. What was the thinking behind that one?
Oh boy, originally that was going to be a big motion control move. We were going to have different settings for different situations where you would be drinking the wine, and the wine was being branded as kind of a great for all social occasions, casual and everything else. And originally we were going to do this thing where we'd have a setting, and the camera would start on the setting and then pull back, and then suddenly another setting would come through, almost as if they were stacked 30 or 40 feet apart. And the camera would just keep pulling back and revealing these settings. And we ended up not really being able to get the cooperation we needed out of the people with the motion control rig. So the director said, okay, we're just going to do it as a live performance. And that's what we ended up doing. And it took a day and a half to pre-light. And then we just started going. And that was the final take it was take 33 or 34. And the take you saw was the last one we did.
What made it so hard? I mean, you just had 4 people in this small little space. What was the difficulty in getting it lit?
Mostly it was the fact that we had to put up a lot of stuff on dimmers. And because there was a shiny floor, if I just put up a row of par cans as backlights, you'd see hot spots in the floor, which I didn't really want. So we ended up building not really a soft box, but a bounce card along the back wall that we aimed all the lights into so that they merged together. And then we had alternating par cans with different colors on them. And then we would mix the color that we wanted. So we were able to sit at this mixing board and just mix exactly what we wanted. And the stage we had didn't have any of that infrastructure in place, so we had to run all the DMX cable and rig the lights, and then keep the softbox from all the lights hitting the softbox from spilling onto the black background and all that stuff. So it took a little while, but we got it.
I was just reflecting on something you said earlier, in that you don't have a particular genre that you work within, which makes it, as you said, harder to get your foot in the door, but your personality makes it easier for people to work with you over the long term. How do you find clients? Let's shift to the business side for a moment. How do you find clients, and do you do anything special besides being nice to keep them?
I tend to be the guy who is nice and easy to work with, and I try to be flexible. I realize it's not my project necessarily. I'm here to make this for someone else. I bring what I think is appropriate, and people tend to work with me because they like what I do for them. But at the same time, if they have specific requests and they want things done a certain way, then it's my job to give that to them.
Well, that also speaks to, how do you deal with creative differences between the director? I'm sure there's times where the two of you don't necessarily agree.
The director always wins. And I try to guide them. There are some directors who are not very visual, and also there are some ad agency clients that are not very visual, or they operate at a different level. I have to sort of bridge the gap between creative and pragmatic. What can we get done, and how well can we do it? And I find that if I can talk sort of in emotional terms. That tends to reach a lot of ad agency types, and a lot of directors respond to that as well. Or actually in pre-production, when I'm asking them what they're going for, I don't always get a lot of concrete direction. And then when I get on set, if I go a direction that I think is appropriate, they may not feel that's appropriate because they haven't necessarily communicated to me the tone or the emotion they want on the spot. So I ask them a lot of emotional questions. What does this feel like? Okay, to me that feels like it's kind of warm, but contrasty and inviting. Or that feels really dark to me. Is that what you're feeling too? Or shadowy? What do you think? And I try to get a read on them that way.
You've been doing this now for 30 years, give or take a couple. If you could go back in time and give the young you one piece of advice that you've learned over these 30 years as a new DP starting out, what advice would you give them?
Learn the politics faster. I was never a natural politician. As when I was younger, I got the creative and the artistic side, but I wasn't well socialized as a kid. I was very shy, so that took a long time to get over. And I saw friends who did work that I didn't like and I would have done differently. Get the jobs that I wasn't getting because they could get along with anybody. And that seems to be by far the most important trick for getting the jobs. Once you get them, you have to know your stuff to keep the job, because if dailies don't turn out well for a day or two in a row, they're going to go on to the next person. But getting the job, you really need to be good at networking and making people feel confidence in you and also expressing confidence no matter what. As I was learning my craft, I would often make things, I would not have time to finish a lighting setup. I didn't have time to do what I wanted. I didn't have the resources to do what I wanted. And I would say, oh, I totally missed the mark. But the people I was shooting for loved it. So I just learned to keep my mouth shut. If they're happy with it, then that's fine. I may not always get what I want, but it's more important to keep working so we get more chances to do what we want. So I guess those would be the two things I would say is, learn to play well with others very quickly. And then if you make mistakes artistically, not technically, if you make a technical mistake, you need to say something right now and fix it and go again. But if it's a creative, artistic mistake and no one else notices, keep your mouth shut. And when they say it looked great, just go, thanks very much. I really appreciate that.
And for people that want to see some of this great-looking work, what website can they go to see it?
Oh, I would recommend mine, artadamsdp.com.
And that's all one word, ARTADAMSDP, artadamsdp.com. Art, this has been a great chat. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's time for a BuZZ flashback. 5 years ago today.
I think that, we live in a litigious society, so the threat of a claim is always out there. Because you really want to, if you're using an example, you want to set it up very clearly. That somebody should be citing Shrek, or something that Shrek was a part of that only Shrek could illustrate. Because if it's any animation, then you're sort of broadly quoting in a way that is maybe going to be more difficult.
This was a BuZZ flashback.
Michael, I was struck when we asked Art what his favorite advice would be to somebody young. It wasn't technology. It was politics.
Yeah.
Get to work with people. I was struck by that.
Networking, get along with people. I mean, that's what it's really all about. And I wish I could have talked to Art. I'm a huge fan of his. I read all of his articles on Pro Video Coalition. And Art, I'm sorry, I didn't even know you had a website, but I now that I do, but I always read you on Pro Video Coalition. But now that I know, I will go to your website. So, but he's a great guy. He's a heck of a talent. I'm a big fan of his.
And a great storyteller. I think that interview ran like 851 minutes. And
I know.
We sort of had to keep scaling it down. But
I didn't get to talk to him, only you did. So.
And I loved the examples that he used. Those talking about the top light for that long zoom, and talking about doing those scenes with the 4 actors changing position in real time. It's just really cool to watch as you look at it over and over and see the technique he used.
I just love guys who know what they're doing and how to solve their problems. And they're just really nice guys.
And which includes
all the people that you want to work with.
All of our guests today. I want to thank Larry O'Connor and Chris Bross and Art Adams for joining us today. There's a lot of history on our website. We invite you to check out digitalproductionbuzz.com, look at some of our past shows. And our website is getting a facelift. Check out our new look at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Visit with us on Twitter at DPBuzz and Facebook at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Our theme music is composed by Nathan Doogie Turner, with additional music provided by smartsound.com. Text transcripts from takeone.tv. Learn how they can help you. Our producer, Serena Catania. Our engineering team, Megan Paulos.
Who's in Lima, Peru, in the jungle right now.
Golia, Keegan Guy, Alex Hackworth, Eileen Kim, James Miller, and Brianna Murphy.
Buzzing over her head.
The voice is Mike. I'm Larry. Thanks for watching.
Bye, everybody.
The Digital Production Buzz was brought to you by Otherworld Computing, providing quality hardware solutions and extensive technical support to the worldwide computer industry since 1988. And by Zen Data, who provides highly competitive digital video archive solutions.